and the celestial equator form a point of crossing, that is, a cross. At that point, the sun is fixed on a celestial cross, hence it is, quote-unquote, crucified. In addition, the celestial equator forms a broad arc through space, which can be allegorically represented as a mount or mountain or a rounded calvarium. Now, the calvarium is a Latin for skull. This, then, is the source of the imagery of the Christian crucifix on Mount Calvary.
Part 4 of this series also showed you how many European churches have black Madonnas. What we didn't tell you may come as more of a surprise. Before the Catholic Church deified Mary, the chief female goddess of antiquity was Isis. This map shows you locations of her shrines. Doctors Finch and Kofer say Isis became Mother Mary in the Catholic Church to offset a male-dominated Greek heritage. Dr. John Henrik Clarke says it's important to know about the male-female balance in traditional African societies. Its loss represents another attack on African heritage.
And we did not argue about whether a man was superior to a woman. You don't even argue about whether you're superior to your mother. It's a stupid argument. We never entered that argument. And if you remember Roots, that first chapter when the boy comes home from the ceremony of manhood, and Hollywood messed up the scene so terribly. When he turns to his grandmother, played by Maya Angelou, and said, "Men don't let women tell him what to do." That was absolute disaster. In true African culture, at the ceremony of manhood, that young man comes and prostrates himself at the door of his mother. And he will not rise until she touches him on the shoulder and said, "Rise, precious fruit of my womb, and accept my blessing." He is not a man until she says so.
This same lack of male and female balance shows up in Islam. Now, when talking about that religion, let's continue to point out attacks on African history and heritage, but in another time period. Now let's go to 711 AD, to the Moorish invasion of Spain. When you read about the Moors in European history books, you'll find all African references deleted. Historians label the Moorish rule of Spain as an Arab conquest. Dr. Burns explains why.
Muslim invasions is more common in the medieval period, because medieval society, again, defined itself in terms of culture, but this culture was a religiously defined culture. So it defined the Muslims originally in terms of a heresy from Christianity, because they didn't understand it very well. So they wouldn't have seen it as more black, a darker-skinned people, which they did know the term Moors,
right,
but they would have probably chosen to say it was an invasion of the Arabs or of the Muslims, because of their own society had been defined in terms of Christian religion, and those who were outside were non-Christians. And it didn't make any difference what ethnic group you happen to belong to. It was what religious group you happen to belong to.
Dr. Clarke says the Islamic nations have committed just as many sins against Africans as the Europeans.
And most blacks have not done, black Muslims have not dealt with the destructive force of Islam, and to what extent the independent states of Africa was destroyed by Muslims. And this is the wreck and ruin the Europeans found when they got there. Islam and the Arabs drained Africa of so much energy and organization. It had no energy and organization to resist the Europeans. I'm not saying one thug is better than the other thug. I'm just saying one thug came before the other thug.
Even before we get into European colonization and New World slavery, you can see how 2 layers of religion and several other cultures stripped and trampled Africa, clouding the issues. Now let's really mix it up and toss in some Jewish folklore and English literature.
Now, would you be shocked if I told you that there is no such thing as a curse of Ham in the Bible? Turn to the 9th chapter of Genesis and begin reading at verse 20 and read on to the end of the chapter, and you don't have any curse of Ham. Well, now, what was the curse of Ham according to what you heard? No, what was the curse on Ham? That he was turned black. Now, where do you find that junk? It is not in the Bible. You've read it, you've heard it. It's in the Babylonian Talmud and in the Midrash Rabbah Genesis, where you get all kinds of stories told about Ham.
But Dr. Kofor also says European writings began identifying blacks as negative around 1200. That's important to know. In 1200, the Portuguese overthrew the Moors, who were seen as negative because they didn't subscribe to Christian beliefs.
But then where did the idea that Cain was black come from? You can trace it back at least to the 1200s in European history, where Cain is represented as black with negroid features. And it may be that the idea that Cain was black goes all the way back to Beowulf. How many of you ever heard of Beowulf? Well, I can see you have been studying your English literature. And in Beowulf, you've got a demon. What is his name? Grendel? And Grendel is a descendant of Cain. And the offspring of Grendel are black. So this is maybe how that idea got into European thought. But it continued right on down into the present in our American thinking.
From 1200 through 1500, the Moors ruled southern Europe. Almost immediately after their expulsion came slavery. The formerly colonized became colonials.
Half of Spain pulls away that Castilian part. Half of Spain is partly free of African Arab domination. They now go to the Pope. They go to the Pope to settle disputes over demarcation. A colonial people now with colonial aspiration. And what does the Pope say? You two good Catholic nations, stop fighting among yourselves. You are both authorized to reduce to servitude all infidel people. And all Europe needed to reduce you to servitude is said that you're an infidel.
Europeans actually started and perpetuated African slave trade. The Portuguese and Spanish can hold most of the blame at the beginning. They purposefully subjugated peoples they knew to have advanced civilizations. But they also knew the key to all African culture revolved around family, tradition, and learning. To keep Africans as slaves in the Americas, they had to develop a system of destroying the African family. Because they knew of past intellectual achievements, they also knew it became crucial not to educate these Africans in the language of their oppressors.
Now, in the 15th and the 16th century, when Europe came out of the lethargy of the Middle Ages, when they learned latitude and longitude again, when they learned maritime skill taken from Spain, preserved by the Africans and the Arabs at the University of Salamanca, the Europeans took this skill and turned on the preservers and began to enslave the Africans on the Mediterranean. This accounts for the large number of technically trained Africans in the New World before the formal beginning of slavery. It accounts for Alonzo Nino, pilot on Christopher Columbus' ship. It accounts for the wheat farmer with Cortez. It accounts for the African armorer with Pizarro in Peru. It accounts for the African road builders with Magellan and Balboa. It accounts for the Africans who built a road across the Isthmus of Darien, now the Isthmus of Panama. Have we studied the skillful African craftsmen in the New World before the formal beginning of chattel slavery?
Slavery itself is a fact in all cultures, but none of them had the cruel twist added to the African American slave trade system.
What it seems to me that happened was that we brought slaves to America because of the market conditions. Virtually all of them were from black Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. We brought them into only one aspect, and that is the lowest aspect of the